Hello there, and welcome to another of Andre's Artist Profiles. Today, I'm going to be profiling an artist on what would have been his birthday, but sadly, this artist died around 16, 17, 18 years ago in the mid-90s. Now, he had a long career that spanned from the early 70s up to the time of his death, but I don't have a lot of his late 80s and early 90s records, but I do have his classics since they were reissued on Verve Originals, and a lot of his 80s work, which is now sadly out of print. And today I'm going to be profiling Mr. Grover Washington Jr. himself. I would like to dedicate this video especially to my man out in Oakland, Henrique Hopkins. This one's for you, Henrique, and also his friend Damian Harrell, and anybody out there who's huge into the jazz funk sound, which I think Grover helped to create. You know, his saxophone sound reverberated into pop jazz quite a bit, but I love the way he handled it. Starting from this album, Inner City Blues, in 1972, recorded for Kudu, a subsidiary of Creed Taylor's CTI, but later reissued by Motown. You'll find a lot of Grover Washington albums on Motown, Mojazz, or whatever, reissued in the 80s and 90s. This is a recent issue. Excellent album. Let me see if I can open it up. There's Grover right there. The next one is All the King's Horses. I'm going to kind of go through these a little bit quickly because all of these albums, All the King's Horses from 1973. I love that picture of Grover with his sax. Great pants. Soul Box, a double album on one CD, also from 1973. Feel So Good, an absolute classic from 1974. Another great picture of Grover inside the album. And of course, Mr. Magic. This was actually a huge commercial hit for him, too. This was on the Mojazz label, the original issue of this. There's another album after this that he recorded called A Secret Place from 1976. It's in the same series as all of these albums, but I don't have that one. I like it, if I can locate it. And an album he did called Reed Seed. There's also another album he did called Skylarkin in 1980. Reed Seed came out in 1978, and he had a band with that album called Locksmith, who had a solo album out too. Mr. Magic is just fantastic, in the same spirit as all those other albums. But, you know, in the late 70s, he switched over to Elektra, actually, after A Secret Place, and issued the album Paradise in 1979. A great, heavily Latin percussive kind of album. Again, really funky. It's paired with a 1984 album called Inside Moves. That was recorded during the time that he was, during the time of The Cosby Show. And Grover Washington's history with that, we'll get into a little bit later, but they put these on a twofer for some reason. But they're both very good albums, Paradise being my favorite of the two. Anyway, this is the album. I actually just found this at the Goodwill. This is my most recent Grover Washington album, Winelight. He broke out big time with just the two of us on this album, featuring Bill Withers. And it really typified his smoother 80s sound, and it became a huge Grammy-winning collection for Grover. And this really began a new kind of era of Grover Washington's sound in the 80s. He followed it up with Come Morning, very similarly styled album, and followed that up with The Best Is Yet to Come. I love the artwork on this album cover, again, very similarly styled. I feel so lucky to have found this album. Bill Cosby and Grover Washington grew up in Philadelphia, and when Bill Cosby was beginning his show, the now iconic Cosby Show, of course, he wanted Grover and his band to do some music for the show. And it resulted in this album. Grover did all the soundtrack music for the Cosby Show, but resulted in this album, essentially drawn from, I think, the first pilot of the Cosby Show, called A House Full of Love. It's a great Grover Washington album, and actually includes a remix of the first season Bill Cosby Show theme. I think this came out in 1986, when the Cosby Show was already in its third season. The next album I have by him is Then and Now from 1988. This is more of an acoustic jazz record, but it's still a great album. So that's what I have for Grover Washington. I know there's some huge elements of this that are actually missing. But Grover's an artist that you can find a lot of his stuff at kind of discount places. And if you do, especially from these eras, it's more than worth picking up. So this video goes out to Grover's family and his admirers. An artist I admire very much. See you next time.